Montana Territory, late October 1881. The most respected builder in the Bitterroot Valley said it would kill her family. A woman, a widow, digging 8 feet beneath her cabin floor, building a stone hearth where no hearth should exist, hiding fire underground like some kind of desperate gamble against physics itself. That's not engineering, he told the Valley Council. That's a death sentence with a trapdoor. But by February, when temperatures plunged to 18 below and stayed there for weeks, Clara Hoffman's children played barefoot on floors that held at 68 degrees. Her neighbors burned through 4 cords of wood a week just to keep frost off their walls. She used one. Today, you'll understand why the deadliest idea became the most copied design in 3 counties, and why the ancient principle she trusted saved more lives than the experts who mocked it. If you want one real frontier technique every week that worked when survival actually depended on it, subscribe now. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story changes how you think about heat, stone, and the ground beneath your feet. Let's go back to where it started. Clara Hoffman wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She was trying to keep her children alive. Her husband, Johann, had died that spring. A logging accident in the high timber, the kind that left families with land, a half-finished cabin, and no margin for error. By late October 1881, Clara had 2 children under 8, a single-room log structure with a stone foundation, and the coldest winter in territorial memory bearing down on the Bitterroot Valley. The cabin had what everyone else had, a fieldstone hearth built into the north wall. Standard frontier design. Open firebox, short chimney, heat rising straight up and out. You fed it constantly. You woke every 2 hours to add logs. You burned through cords of pine and still woke to ice on the inside of the windows. Clara's daughter, Anna, had pneumonia twice the previous winter. Her son, Emil, slept in every piece of clothing he owned. The floor, pine planks laid over the stone foundation, stayed so cold that frost formed on the nails. She asked the neighbors. They shrugged. That's winter. You adapt. She asked the valley's most experienced builder, a man named Harlan Dryden, who'd put up 60 cabins across 2 territories. He told her to bank the fire overnight with ash, hang blankets on the walls, keep the children closer to the hearth. Heat rises, Mrs. Hoffman. That's the law. You can't fight it. You manage it. But Clara had grown up in Baden, in a region where winters were long and fuel was scarce. She remembered her grandmother's house, how the floors stayed warm hours after the fire died, how the stones held heat like a secret. She remembered something else, too. The old houses didn't just have hearths on the wall. Some of them had heat beneath the floor. So in early November, while the valley prepared for the first snow, Clara did something no one expected. She opened a trapdoor in the center of her cabin floor, a trapdoor Johann had framed before he died, meant for root cellar access, and she started digging. Not a cellar, a hearth room, 8 feet down, stone-lined, with a firebox built not to heat the air, but to heat the mass. She would store her winter firewood down there in the dry. She would keep a fire burning low and slow, radiating upward through 6,000 pounds of limestone foundation. She would turn her cabin floor into a thermal battery. The idea wasn't madness. But to Harlan Dryden and the men who ran the valley's lumber mill, it looked like suicide. Clara didn't dig randomly. She measured. The excavation went 8 feet below the cabin's main floor, aligned with the center of the structure. The space was 10 feet by 12, just large enough for a stone hearth, a wood pile, and a narrow walkway. She lined the walls with mortared fieldstone, the same limestone her husband had pulled from the creek bed for the foundation. Then came the hearth itself. Not a standard firebox. A masonry heater. Thick walls, 20 inches at the base, tapering to 14 at the top. The firebox opening faced east toward the trapdoor ladder. The flue ran vertical, but not straight. It curved through 3 internal chambers designed to slow exhaust gases, forcing heat into the stone before venting. The chimney exited through a secondary shaft that ran up the exterior north wall, disguised as an extension of the existing hearth chimney. 2 separate flues, 2 separate fires, if needed. But the below-ground hearth was the anchor. Above the hearth, directly beneath the cabin floor, she laid a cap of flat limestone slabs, 14 inches thick, mortared tight, spanning the entire width of the room. That cap became part of the cabin's foundation. The floorboards rested on it. Ventilation was deliberate. A 4-inch vent pipe, clay-lined, ran from the hearth room to an exterior grate near the roofline. Passive draw. If smoke or gas built up, it vented out, not up into the living space. Clara kept the wood pile stacked along the south wall of the hearth room, 3 cords deep. Below ground, it stayed dry. No rain, no snow, no freeze-thaw rot. Bone-dry firewood burned hotter, longer, cleaner. The principle was thermal mass. Stone absorbs heat slowly, releases it slowly. A fire burns for 3 hours in a conventional hearth and vanishes. But a fire burned low in a stone chamber radiates for 18 to 24 hours after the flames die. The floor wasn't just a floor anymore. It was a radiator. Clara explained this to Harlan Dryden in early December, when he came to see what she'd done. He stared at the trapdoor. He looked at the chimney. He walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking the foundation joints. Then he turned to her and said, "You've built a tomb." His objections were immediate and specific. That pit will flood with groundwater. Your foundation will crack from uneven heating. The moisture from combustion will rot your floorboards from beneath. And if that flue fails, if the draft reverses even once, you'll suffocate your children in their sleep. He wasn't alone. Daniel Pritchard, the mill foreman, called it a coal mine without the coal. He said the weight of the stone and the heat expansion would buckle the cabin's sill logs within a season. A woman named Judith Kemp, who'd lived through 5 Montana winters, shook her head and told Clara's neighbors, "A woman doesn't understand load-bearing stone. She's thinking like a cook, not a builder." Even the valley's minister, Reverend Amos Talley, stopped by. "I don't question your heart, Clara, but this isn't a cabin. It's a cellar with a stove. You're living above fire. That's not prudence. That's pride." But Clara wasn't listening to pride. She was listening to her children coughing at night. She was watching frost creep across the floorboards. She was doing the math. Standard hearth, for cords of wood per winter. Constant feeding, constant cold floors, constant illness. Her way, stone that held heat, wood that stayed dry, fire that worked with mass instead of fighting air. She closed the trapdoor. She lit the fire. She waited. And the valley waited too. Not with hope, but with grim expectation. Because winter was coming. And winter, they all knew, was the only judge that mattered. Harlan Dryden didn't just disagree with Clara Hoffman. He made it formal. In mid-December, at the Valley Grange meeting, he stood before 30 settlers and laid out his case. He brought a hand-drawn schematic of Clara's design. He spoke with the weight of 3 decades building across Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho territories. I've seen root cellars collapse. I've seen stone chimneys crack from uneven draft. I've seen cabins burn because someone got clever with fire placement. He pointed to the drawing. This design violates 3 principles of safe construction. First, thermal expansion. That limestone cap is going to shift. When it does, your floor joists will snap, or worse, your sill logs will separate. Second, moisture. Every fire produces water vapor. In an enclosed stone chamber, you're not venting it fast enough. That vapor condenses on cold stone, seeps into wood, and you'll have rot before spring. He paused. Third, and this is the one that keeps me awake, draft reversal. If snow blocks that exterior vent, or if wind patterns shift, combustion gases will find the path of least resistance. That path is up through gaps in the floorboards into the living space. You won't smell it until it's too late. Someone asked if Clara had consulted an engineer. Dryden shook his head. She's working off memory and hope. That's not engineering. That's recklessness with a trapdoor. The room murmured agreement. Daniel Pritchard, the mill foreman, added his own concern. I've hauled timber for 40 families in this valley. I know what weight does to green logs. That cabin has a stone cap under the floor that weighs 3 tons minimum. You add heat cycling, expansion, contraction. That structure won't last 2 winters. The whole thing will sag, or worse, shear. Judith Kemp, who'd known Clara since the Hoffmans first arrived, spoke quieter but sharper. Clara's a good woman, a hard worker, but she's not a builder. She's a widow trying to do a man's job with a woman's understanding. She doesn't know what she doesn't know. That's dangerous. Even Reverend Tally weighed in, though his tone stayed measured. I don't believe Clara intends harm, but intention and outcome are not the same. She's living above an open fire in a stone pit. That's not a home. It's a kiln. And when something goes wrong, not if, but when, her children pay the price. The valley settled into consensus. Clara Hoffman was brave. She was desperate, but she was wrong. And more than that, she was proving what everyone already suspected. A woman alone couldn't make the decisions a man would make. Not about construction, not about engineering, not about fire and stone and the physics that govern both. Harlan Dryden closed his remarks with a prediction. By February, that cabin will either be abandoned or a memorial. I hope I'm wrong, but I've built enough to know hope doesn't hold up logs. Clara wasn't at the meeting. She didn't hear the testimony. She didn't respond to the warnings. She was home, feeding the fire below her floor, watching her children sleep without coughing, feeling warmth rise through pine planks that, for the first time in 2 winters, didn't frost over. She wasn't trying to prove a point. She was trying to survive. And then, in late December, the valley got its test. December 22nd, 1881. The temperature in the Bitterroot Valley dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. By the 24th, it hit 6. By New Year's Day, it reached 18 below zero and stayed there. For 6 weeks. This wasn't normal cold. This was the kind of cold that cracked sap-filled logs, that turned breath into ice crystals before it left your mouth, that made metal tools brittle and dangerous to touch barehanded. Wind came down from the northern ridges in sustained gusts, 30 to 40 miles per hour, driving the effective temperature far below the recorded lows. Snow didn't fall gently. It arrived in walls 48 inches over 10 days, drifting up to the eaves of cabins that faced northwest. The valley went into survival mode. Families burned through firewood at 3 times the normal rate. You fed the hearth every hour, sometimes more. You slept in shifts to keep the fire alive. If the fire died, you had maybe 90 minutes before the interior temperature dropped below freezing. Even then, you only heated the air. The floors stayed frozen. Frost formed on the inside of cabin walls, creeping up from the sill logs where cold ground met cold air. Windows became sheets of interior ice, unusable until spring. Families hung blankets, canvas, and hides to create inner rooms within their cabins, shrinking the heated space to a 10 by 10 zone around the hearth. Children slept in layers. Adults slept in coats. No one bathed. No one undressed. You lived in a state of semi-mobility, conserving heat, conserving energy, conserving wood. And wood became the critical variable. Daniel Pritchard's mill hands work around the clock, cutting and hauling cords to families whose stockpiles ran low. Some settlers burned furniture. Others burned fence posts. A few burned the siding off their own sheds just to keep the main cabin livable. Sickness spread. Respiratory infections. Frostbite. A boy named Samuel Arnett lost 2 toes after his boots froze solid overnight, and his father couldn't get them off fast enough. A woman named Margaret Hollis developed pneumonia and died on January 14th. Not because her family lacked firewood, but because the cold in her cabin wouldn't break, even with a fire roaring 6 feet away. The valley physician, Dr. Ethan Claremont, made house calls on snowshoes. He recorded internal cabin temperatures in his journal. 12 degrees, 16 degrees, 19 on a good day with a full blaze. Floors averaged 8 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes colder because the ground beneath the cabins froze solid and conducted cold upward through stone foundations and wood planks. People stopped visiting each other. The cold made travel brutal. The snow made roads impassable. Families hunkered in place and waited for February, praying the wood lasted, praying the children stayed healthy, praying the temperature broke before something else did. And during all of this, 6 weeks of relentless, bone-deep cold, Clara Hoffman's cabin stayed quiet. No one saw smoke pouring from her chimney. No one saw her hauling wood from an outdoor pile. No one heard splitting axes at dawn or the constant scrape of someone feeding a fire. At first, the neighbors assumed the worst, that she'd run out of fuel, that she'd abandoned the cabin and taken the children to family farther south, that the underground hearth had failed, or worse, had killed them in their sleep. Harlan Dryden mentioned it to Daniel Pritchard in mid-January. "Have you seen smoke from the Hoffman place?" Pritchard shook his head. "Not much. Maybe once a day. Light column. Nothing heavy." Dryden frowned. "She's not burning enough to keep warm. She's either freezing or she's gone." But Clara Hoffman wasn't freezing, and she wasn't gone. She was standing in her cabin in wool socks, no boots, watching her children play a game on the floor, a floor that hadn't seen frost in 4 weeks. Outside, the valley shivered at 18 below. Inside, the floor radiated steady, even warmth. And the question everyone would soon ask was forming in the silence of that frozen valley. How? February 3rd, 1882. Dr. Ethan Claremont made his way through 3-foot drifts to check on Clara Hoffman and her children. He'd been visiting every family in the valley over the past 6 weeks, documenting illness, monitoring supplies, recording conditions. Clara's cabin was last on his list, partly because of distance, partly because he expected to find it abandoned. When he knocked, Anna Hoffman opened the door in a cotton dress and wool socks. No coat, no shawl, no layers. Claremont stepped inside, and the first thing he noticed was that he didn't see his breath. The second thing he noticed was the floor. It was warm, not tepid, not less cold than outside. Warm. He pulled off his glove and placed his palm flat on the pine planks near the doorway. Heat radiated upward, steady and even, the kind of warmth you'd expect from a sun-baked stone, not a cabin floor in 18 below weather. He looked at Clara. "How long has your fire been burning?" She gestured toward the trapdoor in the center of the room. "I fed it this morning. Around 6. It'll hold until tonight." Claremont walked to the trapdoor. Clara opened it. He descended the ladder into the hearth room. The space was dim, lit by residual coals glowing deep orange in the firebox. The air was dry, not smoky. The woodpile along the south wall was stacked tight, bone-dry, no frost, no moisture. The stone hearth radiated heat in waves, not the sharp, immediate blast of an open fire, but a deep, sustained warmth that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He placed his hand on the limestone cap above the firebox. It was hot to the touch, but not unbearable. He estimated the surface temperature at around 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. He climbed back up. He pulled a small leather journal from his coat and began taking notes. Over the next 30 minutes, he documented what he observed. Interior floor temperature, measured at 3 points. 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 71 degrees Fahrenheit, 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Average, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Exterior temperature, minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Temperature differential, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, Claremont had measured interior temperatures in 11 other cabins over the previous 2 weeks. The warmest, the Pritchard household, with a roaring fire and a well-insulated double-wall design, had averaged 52 degrees Fahrenheit at the hearthside wall and 38 degrees Fahrenheit near the door. The floor stayed at 13 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to numb bare feet in under a minute. Clara's floor was 55 degrees warmer than her neighbor's floors. He asked about fuel consumption. Clara estimated she burned through 1.5 to 2 armloads of firewood per day, roughly a quarter cord per week. Her neighbors, based on Claremont's records, were burning 3 to 4 cords per week, sometimes more. She was using 60 to 70% less wood than the valley average. He asked about the fire schedule. Clara explained that she fed the hearth once in the morning, once in the evening. The stone mass held heat for 18 to 22 hours after the flames died. Even when the firebox went cold overnight, the floor temperature never dropped below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Claremont checked the children. No cough, no fever, skin tone healthy. Emile showed him a wood carving he'd been working on, something he did sitting cross-legged on the floor, barefoot, for hours at a time. That detail stuck with Claremont more than the numbers. A child, barefoot, on a wood floor, in the middle of the coldest winter in territorial memory. Not shivering, not sick, not huddled near a fire. Just comfortable. Claremont closed his journal. He looked at Clara and said, "I owe you an apology." "We all do." Clara shook her head. "I didn't build it to prove anyone wrong. I built it because I didn't have a choice." "Maybe," Claremont said, "but you solved the problem the rest of us didn't know how to solve." He left the cabin and walked directly to Harlan Dryden's home. 3 days later, Dryden visited Clara's cabin himself. He brought Daniel Pritchard and 2 other builders from the valley. Clara opened the trapdoor and let them descend. They spent an hour examining the hearth, the stonework, the flue design, the ventilation. They checked for cracks, moisture, structural shift. They found none. Dryden measured the limestone cap thickness, 14 inches. He checked the mortar joints. Tight, no separation. He tested the flue draft with a candle. Clean draw, no backdraft, no smoke leakage into the living space. He climbed back up and stood in the center of the cabin, silent. Finally, he spoke. "I was wrong." He didn't elaborate. He didn't justify. He just acknowledged it, turned, and left. But Pritchard stayed. He asked Clara if she'd be willing to let him sketch the design. She agreed. Over the next week, he returned 3 times, measuring, drawing, asking questions about the excavation depth, stone selection, flue routing, and cap construction. By mid-February, word had spread through the valley. Not as gossip, as data. Dr. Claremont shared his temperature measurements at the next Grange meeting. He didn't editorialize. He just read the numbers. 68 degrees. 1.5 quarts per month. No illness. No frostbite. No cold-related injury. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then someone asked, "How deep did she dig?" And the question started. "How thick is the cap? What kind of stone? How did she vent it? How much does it cost? How long does it take? Can you do it under an existing cabin? Or does it have to be new construction?" Pritchard answered what he could. Clara answered the rest. And by the time the snow melted in late March, 11 families had started their own excavations. Spring 1882 brought more than warmth. It brought shovels. By May, 19 families across the Bitterroot Valley had either completed or begun construction of below-ground hearth systems modeled after Clara Hoffman's design. Some dug smaller, 6 feet instead of 8. Others expanded the concept, adding root cellars adjacent to the hearth room, creating dual-purpose spaces for food storage and heating. A man named Colin Aldridge, who ran a small ranch 15 miles south, built his hearth room with an exterior access door, allowing him to load firewood from outside without opening the cabin floor. Another settler, Jacob Foss, added a secondary flue that vented through the cabin's main chimney, disguising the underground system entirely. The adaptations varied, but the principles stayed the same. Use stone mass to store heat, radiate it upward through the floor, and keep firewood dry underground where moisture couldn't reach it. Harlan Dryden didn't build one himself, but in June he supervised the construction of 3 hearth rooms for families who hired him. He refined Clara's ventilation design, adding a second passive vent near the floor level to improve air circulation. He standardized the cap thickness at 12 to 16 inches, depending on the size of the firebox. He never publicly apologized beyond that first acknowledgement in Clara's cabin, but his actions spoke clearly enough. He taught the method. He recommended it. He charged fair rates and made sure it was done safely. By the winter of 1882 to 83, the valley had 47 cabins with below-ground hearths. In that winter, when temperatures dropped to 20 below for 10 straight days, no one burned through emergency fuel. No one lost children to pneumonia. No one froze. Dr. Claremont documented the change in his annual report to the Territorial Health Office. Respiratory illness among children dropped by 62% compared to the previous winter. Cold-related injuries, frostbite, hypothermia, dropped by 78%. Firewood consumption across surveyed households dropped by an average of 55%. He attributed the shift to improved heating efficiency via radiant thermal mass systems, adapted from European masonry heater principles and implemented by local settlers. He mentioned Clara Hoffman by name, not as an anomaly, as an engineer. The phrase that stuck, though, didn't come from Claremont. It came from Judith Kemp, the woman who doubted Clara the loudest. In the fall of 1883, at a Valley Harvest gathering, Someone asked Judith what she thought of the underground hearths now that they'd proven themselves. Judith looked across the room at Clara, who was helping serve food, and said, "She wasn't being reckless. She was being methodical. The rest of us were just too proud to see it." That line spread faster than the building technique itself. By 1884, census records and territorial construction logs show that 43% of new cabins built in the Bitterroot, Missoula, and Flathead valleys incorporated some form of below-ground or foundation-integrated heating. Builders across Montana Territory began offering Hoffman-style hearth rooms as an option for families planning winter construction. The term stuck, not because Clara trademarked it, not because she advertised, but because it worked and people remembered who figured it out first. Clara herself never sought recognition. She didn't write about the design. She didn't charge for advice. When people asked, she showed them. When builders asked to measure, she let them. She stayed in that cabin until 1899, when her son Emil, by then a grown man and a carpenter himself, built her a larger house on the same property. The new house had a below-ground hearth room. So, did the house Emil built for his own family 3 years later? The original cabin still stood as of 1920, documented in a territorial survey of historic structures. The hearth room remained intact. The limestone cap showed no cracks, no separation, no structural failure. Harlan Dryden had predicted collapse within 2 winters. It lasted at least 38. Clara Hoffman didn't invent radiant floor heating. The Romans used hypocaust systems 2,000 years ago. Fires burned in underground chambers, heating stone floors that radiated warmth into homes and bathhouses. Koreans developed ondol heating, where flue gases from cooking fires passed beneath stone floors before venting outside. Scandinavians built masonry heaters that stored heat in ceramic mass and released it slowly over days. The principle was ancient. Thermal mass absorbs energy slowly, releases it slowly, and evens out the brutal swings of temperature that come from burning wood in open air. What Clara did was adapt that principle to the materials, tools, and constraints of the Montana frontier. She didn't have engineered brick or ceramic tile. She had limestone from the creek bed. She didn't have cast iron flue systems. She had fieldstone and mortar. She didn't have access to masonry guilds or architectural libraries. She had memory, need, and a willingness to dig. And she understood something that the experts of her valley had forgotten. Heat doesn't just rise. It radiates. If you trap it in mass, it works for you long after the fire dies. If you position that mass beneath your feet, it turns your floor into a radiator. If you store your fuel in the same dry, insulated space, it burns hotter and cleaner, giving you more heat per log. It's not magic. It's physics. And it's been proven across centuries, across cultures, across climates. Modern radiant floor heating systems, the kind installed in high-end homes today, operate on the same principle Clara used in 1881. Hot water or electric coils run beneath floors, radiating warmth upward. Geothermal systems pull heat from the Earth's mass and distribute it through flooring. Passive solar designs use concrete slabs as thermal batteries, absorbing daylight heat and releasing it overnight. The technology has advanced. The principle hasn't. What changed wasn't the science. It was the willingness to trust it. Clara Hoffman trusted stone, trusted fire, and trusted the ground beneath her feet. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for validation. She built what she needed, tested it against the coldest winter her valley had seen, and let the results speak. 55 degrees warmer, 60% less fuel, no illness, no cold, no fear. The valley learned, the territory learned, and the lesson outlasted every person who doubted it. Because survival doesn't care about consensus. It cares about what works. And what worked in 1881 still works now. So here's my question for you. Which part of this solution would you apply to your home today? Would you dig deeper for thermal mass? Store firewood underground to keep it dry? Insulate your foundation to stop cold creeping upward? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know what your coldest winter looked like and whether you trust heat from the ground to get you through it. If this changed how you think about heating, hit that like button. If you want one real frontier technique every week that actually worked when survival depended on it, subscribe now. Because the past wasn't primitive. It was practical. And sometimes, the best engineering isn't what's newest. It's what's been tested for 1,000 years and still doesn't fail. Thanks for watching. Stay warm. And I'll see you in the next one. This script is a dramatized reconstruction based on historical heating principles, hypocaust, ondol, masonry heaters, adapted to frontier conditions. While no verified record of Clara Hoffman exists in Montana Territorial Archives, the technical details, thermal mass, radiant heating, firewood storage, foundation integration, are consistent with documented vernacular building practices across cold climate settlements in the 19th century. Temperature differentials, fuel consumption rates, and structural longevity figures are plausible estimates based on modern testing of similar systems. This content is educational and historical in nature and does not substitute for professional engineering, building codes, or safety standards. Always consult licensed professionals before attempting any construction involving fire, excavation, or structural modification.